This is the pain avoidants hide after losing someone loyal. Let me talk to the people who call themselves emotionally unavailable. Or maybe you don't even call yourself that. You just feel safer when no one gets too close. You protect your independence like a fortress. You run at the first sign of real intimacy. You keep people at arm's length and you think it's strength. It feels like control. But here's the part no one sees: what happens after you lose someone loyal. Because deep down, avoidants aren't heartless. They're just scared, terrified of needing someone. So they push away the ones who care most, the ones who show up, stay patient, stay loyal, until eventually that person leaves. And when that person finally walks away, not out of drama, but because they're exhausted, the pain hits differently, not with loud grief, but with a silence that screams, "You were safe, and I pushed you away." The world doesn't see that pain because you're good at hiding it. You go back to your life. You tell yourself, "It's better this way. I needed space anyway." You distract yourself, but something in you breaks quietly. Because the truth is, you did love them, but you didn't know how to show it. And maybe you thought they'd never leave. Maybe you thought loyalty was permanent. But here's the thing. Loyalty doesn't mean limitless endurance. Even the most loyal people eventually get tired of proving their worth to someone who won't let them in. If you're listening to this and you're the avoidant, the person who lost someone rare, I want you to know you're not broken, but you have work to do. You owe it to yourself to unpack the pain you hide, not to win them back, but to make sure the next person doesn't meet the same end. And if you're the loyal one who had to walk away, you weren't too much. You weren't the problem. You just reached the end of trying to love someone who wasn't ready to be loved. Avoidants often get labeled as cold, distant, or heartless, but what most people don't see is the deep-rooted fear that drives their behavior. When someone pushes love away, it's rarely because they don't feel it. It's because the closeness that love requires feels overwhelming, even threatening. Opening up means risking being seen fully, flaws, insecurities, imperfections. And for someone who has learned to equate vulnerability with danger, that's terrifying. So they create space. They maintain control. They keep people at arm's length, not because they don't care, but because they care more than they're willing to admit. Emotional avoidance is a learned survival mechanism. Somewhere along the line, avoidants were taught, directly or indirectly, that needing someone is dangerous. Maybe they grew up in a home where emotional needs were met with rejection or inconsistency. Maybe they were made to feel like their feelings were too much, too inconvenient, or just not welcome. Over time, they developed a strategy: don't need anyone, and you won't be hurt. Stay distant, and you won't be disappointed. But what happens when someone loyal shows up? Someone who stays, someone who sees through the defenses and genuinely wants to love them. That's when the internal conflict begins. On one hand, the avoidant craves connection just like anyone else. They want to be understood, accepted, chosen. On the other hand, they've trained themselves to believe that closeness equals risk. So they sabotage, they create emotional distance, they find reasons to doubt the other person's intentions. They might accuse, withdraw, deflect, or even mock affection. It's not that they don't recognize loyalty, it's that they don't trust it to last. Deep down, they expect people to leave, so they push them first. It's a silent kind of suffering, one that doesn't look like fear on the outside. It might look like confidence, independence, or even arrogance. But beneath that self-sufficient exterior is someone terrified of needing too much or giving too much away. They may genuinely love the person they're pushing away, but the fear of being vulnerable feels bigger than the love itself in that moment. So the cycle repeats: push, create space, regret it later. Understanding this isn't about excusing the behavior, it's about seeing the pain behind it. Avoidants aren't incapable of love. In fact, they often feel it deeply. But when love demands openness, presence, and emotional risk, their instinct is to protect, not to connect. And that protection often comes at the cost of losing someone they truly care about. When an avoidant loses someone loyal, The grief doesn't show up the way we usually expect it to. There are no loud breakdowns, no desperate calls begging for another chance, no grand gestures to win the person back. Instead, it shows up in silence, in overthinking, in the moments no one else sees. When they awake wondering why they feel hollow, when they go through their day pretending everything is fine while something deep inside them quietly aches. They don't announce their heartbreak because that would require admitting they're in pain. And pain requires vulnerability, which is what they've spent most of their life avoiding. The loss hits differently because the relationship they had wasn't just any connection. It was with someone loyal, consistent, patient, someone who stayed when others would have walked. And because that person was loyal, the avoidant may have assumed they'd always be there, that they could pull away, shut down, act out, and somehow that person would keep choosing them anyway. So when the loyal one finally walks away, not out of drama, but out of exhaustion, the avoidant feels something they aren't used to facing real emotional consequence. This isn't the kind of heartbreak that plays out publicly. It's subtle, invisible. It's the kind that shows up when they scroll through old messages or see something that reminds them of that person and feel a sting they can't quite name. It's the discomfort they feel when they date someone new and realize it doesn't feel the same. It's the moment they realize they never let the loyal one fully in, and now there's no more time to try. The grief avoidants feel is made worse by the fact that they often don't talk about it. They might not even fully understand what they're feeling because they've spent so long denying that they feel anything at all. They don't mourn the person in the traditional sense. They mourn the space that person filled. The calm, the acceptance, the reliability. They mourn what they didn't allow themselves to fully experience. It's not just sadness, it's regret. And that regret becomes something they carry in silence. They may act like they're fine, even convince themselves they are, but the weight of knowing they pushed away something good stays with them. This kind of pain isn't easily seen by others. Friends might think they've moved on. New partners might assume they're emotionally unaffected. But under the surface, there's a quiet, unresolved grief for someone they never let close enough, and who, despite it all, still stayed longer than most would have. The pain isn't just about missing the person, it's about realizing they lost someone who actually saw their worst and still chose to stay until they couldn't anymore. Loyalty is often romanticized as something infinite, an unshakable force that can weather anything. And while loyalty is a powerful and rare quality, it's not a bottomless well. People think that if someone is truly loyal, they'll stay no matter what. But that's not how real human connection works. Loyalty thrives in an environment of mutual effort, respect, and emotional reciprocity. When one person gives endlessly and the other consistently avoids, shuts down, or withdraws, even the most loyal heart begins to break. A loyal person isn't someone who doesn't feel pain. They're someone who chooses to stay through it, hoping that things will change. They believe in the potential of the relationship, in the person they care about. They try, they forgive, they wait. But over time, loyalty without reciprocation turns into emotional burnout. It becomes draining to constantly offer love to someone who won't accept it. It becomes painful to keep showing up when the other person won't meet you halfway. Avoidants often mistake this loyalty for permanence. They assume the loyal person will always be there. They test the limits, pull away, and come back, assuming the other person will still be waiting. And for a while, that may be true. But loyalty doesn't mean a person has no boundaries. It doesn't mean they'll tolerate being emotionally starved forever. It simply means they stayed longer than most people would have. And when they do leave, it's not because they stopped caring. It's because they finally realized their love wasn't being valued. It's important to understand that when someone walks away after offering you their loyalty, it wasn't a rash decision. It was a slow, painful process of realization. It was the buildup of unanswered calls for connection, of conversations that went nowhere, of nights spent wondering what more they could do. And when they finally leave, they don't leave with anger. They leave with grief because they didn't want to go. They just didn't see another option. That's why loyalty without balance eventually fades. Love needs to be held, not just received. If one person is always the safe place, the one who bends, the one who stays, while the other hides behind emotional walls, then over time, the loyal person begins to feel invisible, and no one can stay in a relationship where they feel unseen. Even the strongest, most patient hearts have their limits, and once those limits are reached, there's usually no going back. For someone who leans toward emotional avoidance, facing their own pain is one of the hardest things to do. They're used to running from it, numbing it with distractions, burying it under work, or rationalizing it until it doesn't feel real. Admitting pain means acknowledging that something mattered, that someone mattered. And for an avoidant, that kind of admission can feel like surrendering control. So instead of sitting with the grief after losing someone loyal, they often suppress it. They pretend it didn't hurt. They tell themselves it wasn't the right time, or they weren't the one, or I need space anyway. But none of those stories truly resolve what's underneath. That avoidance doesn't make the pain disappear. It just delays it. It turns into quiet regret that leaks into future relationships. It shows up when they meet someone new, but hold back again. It reappears when they compare others to the one they lost, wondering why nothing feels quite the same. The emotional damage doesn't vanish just because it's unspoken. In fact, unspoken pain has a way of building walls even higher. And eventually, those walls become isolation. Avoidants often assume that by avoiding pain, they're protecting themselves. But in reality, they're trapping themselves in patterns they don't understand. They never fully process why they feel lonely even when they're surrounded by people. They don't see how their instinct to withdraw keeps repeating the same outcome: loss, confusion, distance. Until they stop and face the pain, they can't begin to shift those patterns. Unpacking that hidden pain takes courage. It means sitting with uncomfortable truths like, I pushed away someone who loved me, or I didn't know how to let them in, or I was afraid of being vulnerable. Those aren't easy things to admit, but they're necessary, not to punish themselves and not to fix the past, but to understand themselves more deeply, because the only way out of emotional avoidance is through self-awareness. You can't change what you don't face. Facing the pain isn't about chasing the person they lost. It's not about getting them back. It's about honoring the experience enough to learn from it. Emotional growth happens when someone finally stops avoiding the very feelings they're most afraid of, when they realize that vulnerability isn't weakness and that healing doesn't come from detachment, it comes from reflection. Avoidants don't need to become someone else entirely, but they do need to confront the parts of themselves that are quietly hurting so they don't keep repeating the same loss again. Walking away from someone you love is one of the most misunderstood acts in relationships. People often assume that if you truly loved someone, you would never leave them, but that's not always true. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself, especially when you've spent months or even years trying to love someone who won't let you in. When your loyalty is met with distance, your emotional presence with silence, your vulnerability with detachment, there comes a moment where staying becomes an act of self-betrayal. It's painful to love someone who constantly holds back. You keep giving, hoping your patience will be enough to make them feel safe. You try to understand them, accommodate their fears, make yourself smaller so they'll feel more comfortable. You convince yourself that if you just hang in a little longer, they'll open up. But with each attempt, you slowly lose pieces of yourself. You stop expressing your needs because you don't want to seem needy. You stop asking for more because you're tired of being disappointed. And eventually, you start to feel invisible. The decision to walk away doesn't happen overnight. It's not impulsive. It's the result of countless moments of quiet disappointment. The nights you went to bed feeling alone in the relationship, the conversations where you spoke your heart and were met with avoidance, The times you tried to reconnect and were met with emotional distance. And through all of it, you stayed. Not because you were naive, but because you believed in the person. You believed in the connection. You believed that love, real love, could break through their walls. But there comes a point when you realize that love alone isn't enough. That no matter how much you care, you can't do the work for them. You can't teach someone how to receive love if they're still at war with their own vulnerability. And when that moment comes, walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing to stop losing yourself in someone else's fear. It's choosing to protect your own heart after trying so hard to protect theirs. Leaving doesn't mean you stopped loving them. It means you finally loved yourself enough to stop begging for scraps of connection. It means you understood your value and that loyalty doesn't require endless sacrifice. It means you recognize that staying would only lead to more pain. For both of you, walking away from someone you love requires more strength than most people realize, especially when you didn't leave out of anger or resentment, but because your heart had nothing left to give. You loved them truly, but you also understood that love can't survive in a one-sided space, that no matter how deep your loyalty ran, a relationship needs mutual presence, effort, and emotional safety. And when those things are missing, letting go becomes the most courageous act of all. Maybe you're listening to this right now and you're the one who walked away. Or maybe you're the one left wondering why you pushed someone away when all they did was love you. Either way, this isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides. And avoidants are masters at hiding it, even from themselves. But healing begins the moment we stop running from what hurt us and start owning what we lost. If you're the one still carrying silent regret, it's never too late to look inward, not to rewrite the past, but to rewrite the future. And if you're the one who stayed loyal until it hurt, please know you were never too much. You were just with someone who wasn't ready to receive all you had to give. Some losses don't come with closure. Some people don't get to grow with us. They just teach us something that shapes who we become. And in that there is still meaning. There is still power. There is still healing. Thank you for giving your time, your heart, and your presence to this message. Whether you saw yourself in the avoidant, the loyal, or a little of both, I hope you walk away from this with more clarity, and more compassion, and more strength to choose connection with others, and most importantly, with yourself. Take care of your heart. Honor what you've been through, and never forget, real love doesn't require perfection, just presence. Thank you for listening. Be kind to yourself. Goodbye for now.